Again, I want to welcome you all to the Perryville battlefield. This is the largest and most significant battle in the state of Kentucky in the Civil War, and probably ever for that matter, any other wars you could think of. We had almost 8,000 casualties here. It was the climax of the Kentucky campaign of 1862. And I guess our story, well, here's Kentucky, but our story, I think, try not to get too long-winded because there's so, you know how it is, there's so much you can say, and you try not to get too bogged down. Our story, right back down here is where our story really starts, down here at Corinth, Mississippi, after the Battle of Shiloh. I know most of you guys pretty familiar with the Civil War, or we got any like novices? It's okay if you are. You're a novice.
Just a dummy.
Just a dummy. Okay. Okay. Well, he's a Marine. We know he's going to be a little behind. So anyway, hey, I'm Army. He's Marine. We'll razz each other all day, no doubt. But anyway, after the Battle of Shiloh, of course, the Confederate armies, they withdrew down to Corinth, which was a big railroad junction, and the Confederates had to withdraw even more. Henry Halleck was the commander. He got down there and he divided the army into two. I believe it was Grant took his army of Mississippi, or no, his army of Tennessee, the Tennessee. Isn't that one of the confusing things? I'm starting to get a little better at it, but you know how it's like there's the army of the Tennessee, and then there's the army of Tennessee. There's the army of the Union Army. Here's a good way to think about it. The Union Army, they named their armies after rivers, and the Confederates named theirs after states. So this is the Army of Mississippi, as opposed to, I think Grant at one time had the Army of the Mississippi, which was named after the Mississippi River. But anyway, we have two people here. I'm going to guess that a good many of you will recognize this guy right here.
Greatest general in the Confederacy.
I guarantee you either love him or you hate him. There's probably no in between. I kind of like him. I'm not going to say he was the greatest general in the world, because I think we can all say the man was flawed. But more often than not, or in a lot of cases, if his subordinates would have followed his orders, he would have won a lot of times when he actually lost. So he was the commander. He ended up being the commander of the army here at Perryville. And maybe fewer of you will recognize this guy. This is Don Carlos Buell. And as much as this guy was hated just as much, if not more, by his troops. He married an Alabama Southern belle, and who actually owned some slaves. He was rather sympathetic to the Southerners, and some people had actually questioned his loyalty. But anyway, he was ordered to go from Corinth, Mississippi, to head due east to take Chattanooga. The two main railroad junctions in the South were at Corinth, Mississippi, and Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so basically he took the I guess it's the Memphis-Chattanooga Railroad, I believe, and he just basically followed it across Mississippi and Alabama, and repaired the railroads as he went. So he was going very slow. One, because it takes a long time, for a few reasons, and again, try not to get too long-winded. Nathan Bedford Forrest and Joseph Wheeler had a lot to do with him going slow, because they were tearing up tracks almost as fast as he was building them. Buell didn't want to go to Chattanooga to begin with. He wanted to go up to Nashville and start his campaign from there. But Lincoln and Halleck insisted he goes up to here. Well, we get back to Bragg. What Bragg does then is one of the most, I think, greatest logistical feats of the war. He took his army from Corinth, Mississippi, took them by train down to Mobile, Alabama, then all the way up to Atlanta, Georgia, then back up to Chattanooga. and he basically got to Chattanooga before Buell got there. I think Buell only made it to, what's the name of that town? Made it about, into Alabama before he basically figured that the gig was up, and he went up to, started heading north. When Bragg was in Chattanooga, I don't have the picture, but there was another guy named Edmund Kirby Smith. He was the commander of the Army of Kentucky, Eastern Tennessee. He was in Knoxville. He came down to Chattanooga to talk to Bragg. He proposed that he said that when John Hunt Morgan came through Kentucky earlier that year, he came back and told Smith that Kentucky was ripe for the Confederacy. All they had to do was show up, and there'd be 30,000 volunteers just like that. And from there, Louisville, then huzzah. So, sounded like a great idea. So here was the plan. The plan was Kirby Smith, I think he had like about 12,000 in his army. He was going to come up here. This is the Cumberland Gap. This here, I don't know how well you guys can see the map. This is Kentucky. This is where we are, right? There's Danville, Harrodsburg. There's Perryville. There's Lexington, Frankfort, Louisville, Cincinnati, Richmond, and Knoxville, Nashville. So that kind of gives you an idea. He started here, and Smith came up in here and is going to take out George Morgan's brigade that was guarding the Cumberland Gap so that they wouldn't have this guy in their rear. And then the plan was for him to join Bragg, and they were going to take Nashville. Well, Kirby Smith was not somebody who was going to take orders from Braxton Bragg. He kind of liked his independence, and Bragg outranked him by date of rank, so he had seniority. So instead, what Kirby Smith did was he went on up I-75 here. No, the interstate wasn't there at the time. 1950s Eisenhower, another great feat. But anyway, that's a different story. He went up here. He took on Bull Nelson's outpost, the supply depot up here in Richmond. The Battle of Richmond, where a guy you guys know a lot about. I've heard you know a lot about Patrick Cleburne. He was the hero of Richmond, Kentucky, and he ended up one of the most lopsided routes of the Civil War for the Confederacy. They captured the supply depot. Well, they also captured a lot of Union uniforms, so which was nice because the Confederates, they always needed more uniforms and shoes and everything else because they weren't the best supplied. But that would also cause problems here at Perryville when off in the distance you see people wearing blue uniforms, and they're actually uniforms stolen from Richmond, and Confederates were wearing them. So that led to confusion on both sides. So anyway, he took Richmond, came up and took Lexington. Bragg was down here, and he was kind of a matter of fact about it. He was like, well, okay, I guess I'll just make do. And God, I could psychoanalyze that boy But he was like, okay, so he did that. He never really took assertion at anything, so he came around here. He skirted the north side of Nashville, went up I-65, took the Bluegrass Parkway right up here to Bardstown, where you guys were today, weren't you? But God, I can't believe they took you that way, man. I mean, it's so easy. Louisville, down here, get off at Lawrenceburg to Harrodsburg, and you're here. Oh, well. Anyway, let's see. Damn. Anyway, he gets up here to Bardstown, and Bill, he gets up here to, skip over a whole lot, get up here to Louisville. And Bragg, he comes up here to Frankfort. He wants to swear in a new Confederate governor in order to instill a draft, in order to conscript a whole lot of Confederates. Well, Bill, on October 1st, he sets his 3 corps out to take to attack the army here in Bardstown. He sends 2 divisions led by Joshua Seal right down I-64 here towards Frankfort. And during the ceremony, swearing in ceremony, artillery rounds start falling into Frankfort. So they freak out, they all evacuate, and Bragg orders this man right here. Oh my God, here he is. I'm sure most of you will recognize this one. Now, here's a vote. How many say it's Leonidas Polk? How many say it's Leonidas Polk? I don't know. Yeah, but yes, he graduated. He was from a rich family in North Carolina. He graduated from West Point, I think in 1827, and where his junior year, he converted to Episcopalian Christianity. He wasn't real religious beforehand, but he had a conversion, became rather zealous in his faith. After graduating, he went on a little tour of New England, and then 6 weeks after graduating, he resigned his commission in the Army. He ended up joining the Episcopalian Church, and for the next 3 decades was the Episcopalian Bishop of Southwestern United States. In June of 1861, he went to Richmond, walked into the office of his good friend and West Point buddy Jefferson Davis, and a few hours later he walked out commissioned a Major General in the Confederate Army. Needless to say, a lot of people don't think he was the best general the Confederates had. Bishop Polk, yes. So he tells Polk to come up here to come on up here, and they think the big battle for Kentucky is going to be up around in this area. But Polk knew that there were 3 Union corps coming his way, so he didn't want to be strung out on the road and get flanked by that. So for the first of many times the next year, Polk disobeyed orders of Bragg, and he went due east and they ended up here in Perryville. They went this for 3 reasons. 1, because he didn't want to get flanked by the Army. 2, there was the supply depot right here at Bryantsville that he wanted to keep between him and the Army of the Union Army. And reason number 3 is there was a terrible drought, and this area had one of the few water supplies. So I want to tell you one story here. Let's see, I said, about 5 minutes and then we'll get walking. There's one story I want to tell you about. It's easier just, is it in this one? Just blew up. No, daggone it. Anyway, here it is. I want to read it directly out of here. This is a good book if you want to learn about Perryville. By Kenneth Snow's The Grand Havoc of Battle. It was about here in Taylorsville. They spent their first night here in Taylorsville, the 1st Union Corps. And this is about the 21st Wisconsin. Unfortunately, slave catchers seemed to possess a death wish, at one point cursing the Federals. To men like Conley, there was an even uglier side to Taylorsville that was peculiar to the South, as the already agitated soldiers of John Starkweather's brigade soon discovered. Sergeant John Henry Otto of the 21st Wisconsin, a veteran of the Prussian Army, barely coping with his largely untried officers and men, watched as 2 runaway slaves entered the brigade camp at Taylorsville. Well, soon followed by 2 local men who were their slave owners with long whips, insisting that they turn over the slaves. Well, the 21st Wisconsin was not going to have any of that. They refused, and they were taunting them, throwing corn and other things at the 2 men. The 2 men ended up going to General Lovell Rousseau, who is right here. He was the division commander for the 21st Wisconsin. He came and he insisted that they hand over the slaves. He even had the 1st Wisconsin and the 79th Pennsylvania hold them at gunpoint, insisting that they hand over the slaves. And the men of the 1st Wisconsin, they refused to. And now 21st Wisconsin, Rousseau declared, "Will you obey my orders or not?" "Yes, General," a voice called out, "if consistent with our duty and our conscience, but no slave catching." "Who said that?" demanded Rousseau. 5 men stepped forward, and it quickly diffused, and they had a big party, celebrated getting one over on Rousseau. They ended up hiding out the slaves in an ambulance, and for the remainder of the war, apparently those slaves continued on as cooks and basically manservants for the 21st Wisconsin. I tell you that story because when we get back and talk about the 21st Wisconsin a little bit later, that might be a factor. So real quick, they come in here, the things you want to know about this battlefield. The Union Army, or the Confederates, they were in Perryville, and they were coming in piecemeal. one unit at a time. Slow down. The Union Army was coming in 1 unit at a time. The 2nd Corps got here first. The Beale was with them. They were right up about a mile that way, about 2 miles that way. The 3rd Corps, they were coming in from the Lebanon Road in that direction, and 1st Corps was coming in from Macville. Basically took the same route you took getting here. So,
Yeah, I took that for a reason.
yeah.
Don't ever argue with me again.
Yeah, there we go. So what happened was on the morning of October 7th, the 7th Arkansas was getting water down here in a tributary of Doctors Creek when the division of Philip Sheridan noticed them. They attacked. They had some morning fighting down there. They ended up driving the rebels back, but then the rebels then knew that there were some armies nearby. Beale wanted to wait until 3rd and 1st Corps came up, so he told Sheridan and 2nd Corps not to engage until the next day. Unfortunately, Bragg was not going to follow the same orders, and he was going to press the issue. Bragg was in Harrodsburg. He ordered Polk to attack. Once again, Polk disobeyed the order and decided to take up what he called an offensive-defensive position. Basically, hold their ground and wait for them to attack and see what happens and react to whatever happens. Well, the morning went away and went on, and Bragg didn't hear any artillery from Harrodsburg, so he got upset, came down here, and immediately ordered them to attack. But Wharton's cavalry noticed right up over here some more Union soldiers coming in. So they suddenly realized that they needed to get to the flank of the enemy. So he called for Benjamin Franklin Cheatham right here, the division of Benjamin Franklin Cheatham. He was from Tennessee. He was a hard fighting, hard drinking son of a you know what, and he did not get along really well with Bragg, and but he was a pretty good general. But anyway, he had 3 brigades that they brought along. They came out of Perryville. They came out here, and there were 3 brigades. The 1st brigade was from Donaldson. Donaldson's brigade. He was the nephew. His aunt was Rebecca Donaldson, and some of you may know Rebecca Donaldson just happened to get married to Andrew Jackson. So he was the nephew of Andrew Jackson, and he was the first brigade to be called to attack what they thought at the time was the left flank of the Union Army right up on this hill over here that we'll be at later, hopefully. And so I'm going to start by walking down here, and I will tell you about Daniel Donaldson's brigade and the opening movements of the battle. Anytime throughout the day, if you have any questions, feel free to hurl them out at me, but I especially appreciate easy questions that make me look smart.
Okay, you said that's the left flank. Wouldn't that be the right flank?
Here's how: if you are the Confederates,
Yeah.
and you're this way, and you're facing this way, whenever we talk about the flank of an army, we talk about it from that army's perspective.
Okay.
So the Union Army's facing this way, so this is their left flank and this is their right flank.
Yes.
Yes.
So, for the Confederates, that's the Union Army's left flank.
For the... Okay, I know what you're saying, but we always consider the flanks from the perspective of that army.
Okay, so that's the right flank.
That's the right flank of the Union Army,
Of the Union Army.
and the left flank of the Confederate Army.
Correct.
Yes. Anybody else?
I
Yes,
got
sir.
one for you. You're talking about they captured all that Union clothing at Richmond.
Yes.
Well, Kirby Smith, the next morning he woke up, went out to review some of his headquarters troops, and he saw a line of Yankees with dark jackets and light blue pants, and he got scared to death. He thought he was surrounded. So he gave an order to his men. He said, get rid of those blue uniforms. So all these guys had to go back to the quartermaster barns and put on their old clothes again.
Yeah. there were still a lot of Confederates wearing blue here at Perryville, and
Probably blue trousers, yeah,
Blue-
but not so much the coat.
well, but so let's take a walk down the road here, and we will talk about up there. And the Confederates were coming from that direction.
Where's that water? Said they were drinking, they were looking, going.
Water, there's a little bit of water, there's some puddles of water in this tributary called Doctor's Creek.
That's interesting.
It came from, oh, that's not Doctor's Creek. That's just a little runoff of the Chaplain River. Doctor's Creek's on the other side of that hill. And let me get one of my pictures out here so you can see.
Group after our bus ride can't do a whole lot of walking probably, so how far are we gonna go walking?
So they were being overly exaggerating when they said they want to do a whole lot of walking.
Oh yeah,
Okay, this is as far as we'll go here, but
so should I have them pull the bus up down to?
no, because we're gonna walk. We're gonna have a nice little walk after this, though. I mean, going up to, or
Level ground?
I'll make it work. We'll go back to the bus, and instead of taking the long way, we'll try to take a shortcut up there. So I'll try to minimize how much we walk then.
Let's limit the walking as much as we can.
So there,
Where do you want the bus? So the bus stays there?
the bus is there for now. We'll just walk back and join the bus. All right. So let me. All right. General Daniel S. Donaldson. He had five. Basically, all of the Confederates, except for Johnson, of course, I guess, had about 5 regiments per brigade. Johnson's had Donaldson. They came from Perryville, walked through the dry riverbed of the Chaplain River, came up here to the bend in the river they called Walker's Bend. They came up, and the 3 brigades were lined up 400 yards apart. The brigade in the front was from Daniel Donaldson. The middle 400 yards behind him was A.P. Stewart's brigade, and 400 yards behind them was George Maney's brigade. They were ordered to, Donaldson, the commander, ordered the commander of the 16th Tennessee Infantry Regiment. His name was John Savage. Ordered him. He said, he pointed up over to that hill right up over there. Said, see that battery? I want you to take that battery. Well, Savage was not a likable person, and he didn't like other people. And he was certain that this was an ambush. He could see the guns up there. He could see they've already faced some picket lines from the 33rd Ohio that was up coming around this area when they were coming through here, that they pushed the skirmishers back up over that hill. So he knew that there was a whole lot of Union soldiers up over that hill. If you see that telephone pole, this is a guess just because from where I'm standing, it's kind of hard to judge where things are, but I think that is about the area where the 10th Wisconsin would have been formed up. So Savage here, he thought for sure that he was going to get killed, that his commanding officer and both Cheatham and Donaldson hated him and wanted him dead. And he says, you want me to take that? You're going to have to give the order yourself, because I'm not going to order the deaths of me and my men. And he goes, well, we have our orders, so you will have to take it. Donaldson gave the order, and onward they charged. My friend Doug, who gives tours here, he likens this to the charge of the Light Brigade, where onward 10,000, or what was it, 500 men, cannons to the left of me, cannons to the right. You know, ours is not to, I wonder why, but ours is just to do and die. And that's kind of what happened here. They got up here to the top of that hill over there, and suddenly we have Simonson's battery was right up over there just to the left where those trees are off in the distance. Then you had another battery by Sam Harris's battery. We'll see where that is later on today. It was over that hill about a mile, and they started firing on them. You've had the 10th Wisconsin, you've had basically 3 brigades right along through here, 4 brigades were all firing on this one regiment. Now, they weren't trying to kill him. The plan was that the other two, the 38th and the 15th Tennessee were supposed to follow him, and they all go in together. But Savage got a bee in his bonnet, and he charged on ahead of the other 2 regiments, got out in front and got stuck right out there, and it was a terrible crossfire. Well, like I said, the Union Army were coming in piecemeal. First the 3rd Corps. Now this was the 1st Corps over here under the commander of Alexander McCook. They were coming in this way, and they were coming in this way, coming like this. So right up over here, the division of General James Jackson's division was coming up on this far side over here. So basically they still, instead of hitting the left flank of the Union Army, they were basically getting right into the middle. They were going to have the Union Army all around them. There is a battery manned by Lieutenant Charles Parsons' battery. We're gonna head over there next. They set up 8 cannons up on this hill over there, and then they started firing in on him. So suddenly he's got 3 Union cannon batteries firing down on him, plus at least 3 brigades coming down on that one regiment. So then they were given orders to head up here to take Harris's battery. And if I sound like it's really confusing, it really is confusing. It was really a mess, and Savage got wounded in it, and they just, what else do I say about this? So yeah, I pretty much need to go over to Parsons' battery now to kind of pick up the story, but I wanted to give you an idea of how this started. They came down through this area right here. The 15th Tennessee was in front. 2 more regiments were behind them, but they were going a lot slower than Savage was, and he basically got in the thick of a big old hornet's nest. So let's get on over here, and we'll head over to the open knob, and if anybody has any comments or questions. All right, well, let me orientate you a little bit first. Orientate. God, that's a tough word for me. I don't know, orientate, it never sounds right when there's some words that you say that just never sound. Anyway, right over here is where we were and where Donaldson was. Now, a lot of these trees weren't here, and it was a lot, if you see some of the old pictures from like the 1880s and stuff, it's like you could see for miles, and there wasn't nearly as much trees and stuff. So, because they were able to see 2 or 3 ridges over when Wharton's cavalry was doing his recon up and down that area there. And actually, due to the number of hills, it looked like they were on the further hill when they were looked like they were on the closer hill when they were even on the further hill. So Wharton's reports to Bragg were kind of misguided because the first Corps. All right, there's a question. Companies in the Civil War, they normally mustered on with 100 people. And so this is kind of like the Roman legions. They were powers of 10. A company would normally have 100 people. There would normally be 10 companies per brigade, or per regiment, sorry. And so a regiment would have 1,000, and then you would normally have about 3, maybe 5 regiments per brigade. So a brigade should have 5,000 people, and then you'd have 2 to 3 brigades per division, which would give you 10 to 15,000, and then 2 to 3 divisions in a corps, and then there were 3 corps here at Perryville. Obviously, there weren't nearly that many people because that was their ideal. Normally, each regiment here would probably have anywhere from 300 to 600 soldiers. And then you can kind of do the math to figure out what the brigades and the division strengths would be. For instance, the 21st Wisconsin that I was talking about, they actually had 1,000 people when they started. on the way from Louisville. By the time they got here, I think 2 companies were left to guard supply wagons, and then the rest of them, they fell out. And by the time they got to Perryville, out of 1,000, they only had about 400 soldiers that actually arrived here at Perryville. So that gives you an idea. There's a lot of attrition, especially walking here from from Louisville. Long, hot walk. A lot of people fell out. A lot of people didn't make it this far. But anyway, if you look, you see this fence down here. And normally I start at the museum, and then we walk, and we stop at this fence, and then we walk up this hill. And I can tell you, at the time of the battle, that fence was 6 feet tall, very sturdy, a very formidable barrier. There were small trees and thorn bushes and shrubs all along the fence, which is very common for fences. They didn't tend to mow and trim along the fence lines back in that day. Then if you look back beyond that fence line, maybe about 30 or 40 yards, you would have, all the way up there, you would have seen a forest. It wasn't a dense forest, mainly small to medium-sized trees, all the way down to the river. The river, Chaplin River, is just on the other side of that hill there. So when Donaldson was over there, and he was being fired upon by 2 batteries. This battery right here, commanded by Lieutenant Charles Parsons, they were coming up on here. They had 8 guns. They had 4. They had 4 12-pound Napoleons, just like that. They had 3 12-pound howitzers, which is a shorter barreled version of that, and they had 1 Parrott rifle. The Parrott rifle never got unlimbered. When Donaldson realized that he was being fired upon, well, the cannons, they got lined up here. They started firing this way because they saw Wharton's cavalry. But then when they saw Donaldson over here coming up, his regiment, they turned their guns and they started firing on Donaldson. So now Donaldson has 3 artillery batteries and probably 5 brigades coming down on him. He's starting to get a little bit more support from the other 2 regiments, but at the same time, he's just in a maelstrom over there. So Cheatham and Polk, they ordered George Maney, who is in the back, the 3rd element of the division that was coming over here, to come down a little bit further down the river and to take this hill. Now, George Maney, he was not a West Point graduate, but he was a really good commander. Almost exactly 6 months to the day, on April 8th, 1862. Some of you guys might know what happened on that date. Yes, and in fact, I think that was the 2nd day of Shiloh. It was a Monday, and in Mary Bell's peach orchard, George Maney's brigade met up with William Terrell's artillery, and he actually William Terrell's artillery repelled George Maney. Well, William Terrell was the commander of the brigade on top of this hill, and he put together Parsons' battery. He got promoted to general since Shiloh, and he was very proud of his battery. He loved this battery. He loved his guns, and many people think that he loved his guns more than he loved his men, because his main concern was saving these guns and manning these guns against the enemy, to the detriment of the infantry that he was supporting. So when Maney came along, he had 5 regiments, or Maney's brigade, 5 regiments. You had the 9th Tennessee on the far down here. You had the 6th Tennessee here, and then you had the 41st Georgia was coming up through here. They were green. This is their first fighting for the 41st Georgia. The rest of them were hardened Shiloh veterans. They were up here, they're firing away, and the first to come out of the trees was the 41st Georgia. They were coming down from this way, and you can see how hilly it is. They were very hard to see because their butternut uniforms made really good camouflage, because if you look through there, that was about the same color as a lot of the trees and the grass, so they couldn't see them immediately, and they were probably about to the road before they were actually seen. And that's pretty much point blank range when you're talking about firing cannons and rifles. So they pointed their guns back this way and they started firing at the Georgians. The 9th and the 6th Tennessee, they started coming up. They got to the fence and they were held down. Up here on the hill, along with the 8 guns, we had the 123rd Illinois Infantry Regiment. They were formed up behind these guns. Terrell was pretty stressed out. He was surprised. Obviously, he didn't expect a fight like this. So about the time he noticed that the 105th Ohio was coming up, he ordered the 123rd Illinois to fix bayonets and to charge down and take Maney's men. All right, let's think about this for a second. I want to tell you, first of all, the 123rd Illinois had only been mustered in maybe a month or so, just like the rest of this brigade. When we talk about them, they've only been in about 4 to 6 weeks. They've had maybe a couple days of drill. For the one whole week of that was just marching here from Louisville. They had 0 training. They were as green as it comes. A lot of their weapons were old Belgium smoothbore muskets, and they really weren't supplied all that well either. When they came up, they really didn't know how to march. They didn't know how to formation. Their front rank was reversed to the back rank, which kind of, if you know about the military marching and stuff, that really screws you up. They normally had like taller people in the back, but if you're reversed, then the taller people are in the front, so the people back here can't fire over them, and they really didn't know what they were doing to begin with. So yes, I made it sound confusing because it was. So they fixed bayonets and they charged down that hill. Now let's think about this. They're charging with bayonets against Shiloh veterans entrenched behind a big sturdy fence. And if you see it slopes up just a little bit, that meant the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th ranks could fire over the 1st ranks. So basically you could have them firing continuous fire up against these green soldiers who are charging down to attack with bayonets people behind a big sturdy fence. How do you think this is going to work out? Yeah, they got down to the bottom of the hill, they laid off one round, and then they skedaddled. They ran back up this hill, something awful. They ran up here so crazed, they didn't stop at the beginning of this hill. They ran down that hill, then they ran across where the bus is, then they ran up that hill, and they didn't stop till they were way over on the other side of that hill. They just got the you-know-what scared out of them because of Maney's men. So about this time, we got our commander here, up here on this sign, Brigadier General James Jackson. He was the division commander here, and this sign is blatantly false. It says that he was impressive in person, graceful in manner, and kindly chivalrous. He was the highest type of gentleman, Boulder Dash. He was in numerous duels. Basically had to leave the army because he couldn't get along with anybody. He was hated by his men. The way they marched him from Lexington to Louisville, and then they had to go through a hot parade march down the streets of Louisville. Oh, his men hated him. And they hated Terrell. They hated a lot of their commanders, but I guess that wasn't unusual in the Civil War. But he was up here on his horse. The fighting was going on, and apparently suddenly Jackson says, "I do believe things are getting mighty particular." And about that time, a bullet put him right in the chest. He fell off his horse and he was dead before he hit the ground. A couple of his adjutants, they picked him up and they carried him about halfway down this hill trying to get him to an ambulance. One of them had a bad back. They said screw it, and they left him there, went off to find help. And then some of the Confederates talked about coming across his body whenever they took this hill and taking buttons off of his jacket for souvenirs and stuff. So he got killed. These guys, we go back over here to Maney's brigade. They get tied up at the fence. Eventually they decide that they can't stay at the fence or they're going to die. So they make one big surge. They break across the fence. Then right here, about 30 yards down here, they get tied up again. And this goes on for a little while. But then they finally surge up. They get up to the top of this hill. They take out the 105th Ohio. One of the people we know from the 105th Ohio is a man who gives us a lot of the history from there. His name is Albion Torgey, and he's an interesting character. He wrote a book called Story of the Thousands. This is a picture of him and two of his sergeants. He was a lieutenant with the 105th Ohio. An interesting story about him is after the war, he became a staunch abolitionist lawyer, defending the freedmen, setting up freedmen bureaus and helping them out. And then I believe it was in 1896, he was the lead counsel for a man named Percy in a landmark legal case. He lost, by the way, but he was the lead counsel for the defense in Plessy v. Ferguson. Yes. So, a couple things I like to talk about here when I'm in general is this here is a 12-pound Napoleon, one of the most common cannons of the Civil War, and they were firing canister. How many here knows what canister is? Yeah, a lot of you know what canister is. Those who don't, think about a shotgun shell made to fit that barrel. You're going to have 28 steel balls, just like this. This is a canister ball. There were 28 of these stuck in essentially a tin can that was shot out of here. You can pass this around if you want to see what that was like. Sometimes they would fire double canister, which would be two of big shotgun shells. So you're talking, over 50, almost 60 rounds of those balls coming through the. Think about that. How do you keep going on something like that when you've got 4 or 5 guns firing that stuff straight at you? What goes on in your head that makes you keep going? How hard could that be to keep that up?
Probably just hurry up and I'm gonna die.
Just hurry up and you gotta die. Yep. And here's something else I want you to think about. Look over there. What do you think if you, during this battle, if you looked over to this side of the hill, what do you think you would see right down through here? Any ideas? Well, everyone, I heard some good answers there. Every one of these cannons required 12 horses. So 12 times 8 is 96. So you've got 8 limber wagons, 8 caissons. Limber wagons are the 2-wheeled supply wagons behind the guns, and the caissons were the 4-wheel supply wagons. Before then, they had carried all the supplies that you needed to run the battery. So that whole side of the hill is covered with wagons and horses. 96 horses, right? Every four horses needed a soldier to come back and hold the reins. So here's my question. Now think about this. Every bullet, every gun, and of course we had William Turner's artillery battery. I didn't mention that. He had 4 guns that was firing, 4 cannons that were firing on this hill. Everything that didn't land on this hill obviously landed on the other side of this hill where all those horses and wagons were. So which would be worse? Being in the 105th Ohio up here firing maybe on your knees or prone at the Confederates, or being some poor 18-year-old kid trying to keep 4 horses managed together while you've got shell and shot and burning stuff flying all around you? I don't know. I think I might rather be on the hill than be trying to manage a bunch of horses getting shot up. That just boggles my mind what that kind of pandemonium it had to look like. Well, they saw Terrell. Like I said, Terrell was freaking out over his guns, but then he finally realized the gig was up and he wasn't going to be able to hold up. So he ordered the retreat. They went down this hill. There's a little Devil's Lane back down there. Devil's Lane is kind of a makeshift fence that was basically 2 fence rows about 6 feet apart. They were to divide property lines, especially when there was a dispute on those property lines. So apparently Sam Bottoms, the owner of this property, he had a dispute with the people on the other side there, and they had a little devil's fence there that kind of separated the two properties. So Terrell, he tried to form a defense right up here. So you got Maney's men, and as they were coming up, when Benjamin Franklin Cheatham, the division commander, I kind of like this passage that he wrote when he talked about his men as they were coming up this hill. He said, Benjamin Franklin, the division commander Cheatham said, I had placed myself about 100 yards to the right of Maney's brigade and on a line with them where I could look down the lines between the contending forces. I could see in the smoke occasionally that as his men fired, they would take one step forward to load, which assured me they were making progress under that terrible storm of artillery and musketry. To me, it was the most exciting few moments of my life. So they got to the top of the hill. So these guys, they've been fighting all the way up this hill. When they finally get up here, what do you think they did? They came up here, they got the guns, they got the guns, they turned them around. They saw the Confederates running down there. They said, all right, boys, let's go. They didn't stop. They just went right down over this hill, right down over that hill, chasing the Confederates down there. Terrell could not hold his position there. And, you know, when you read over these histories, a lot of it doesn't make sense. You don't understand, because they ended up down here in the cornfield where you guys stopped earlier and you saw. So they went that way, and then they turned and went that way. The only thing I can think about that is, like I was telling you before, the backside of this hill, they probably didn't go that way because it was a big mess of horses and nasty wagons and ugly stuff, and they were probably going around that, would be my guess, because I think some of them went back down that way. But anyway, they got taken off that way. All right, now we get to one of our favorite people I'm going to be talking about. Yes, sir.
Was it the Confederates coming over the hill?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, George Maney's Confederates were coming up this hill, and then they stormed over this hill, and then they continued chasing the Union soldiers. Yes, sir.
When the battle is going on and they're firing the cannons with 18 balls like that, how far did the balls
28.
How far did they go?
Oh.
I mean, could they go a mile?
No. The smooth bores could probably be, depending on what these were short range. These were probably a few hundred yards. Yeah, maybe 500 yards. But then if they were firing shot or their shells and stuff, the smooth bores could probably go maybe 3/4 of a mile. The Parrott rifles and the rifled guns, they could go 2 or 3 miles with pretty decent accuracy.
But do they have to swab the cannons?
Yes, between every firing, they had a wet swab that they had to ram down the barrels. And then otherwise they get too hot, so to keep the barrels from melting down, they had to keep them cool and to keep them clean, because residue can build up in there, and that'll get stopped.
How many rounds did they do in, say, 10 minutes?
Well, a good crew. Now these were not good crews. Okay, of 100, I think there was 130 soldiers in Parsons Battery, and give or take, and then about 100 of them were infantry soldiers that they drafted out of the 105th Infantry just a few days before. So they had very little training, very little drill. And so a good artillery battery could fire maybe 2 rounds a minute if they're really good and they're really clicking. But it's probably 2 rounds, maybe 3 rounds every 2 minutes, something like that, you know, on average, depending on a whole lot of factors. Yes, sir.
How long before the Rebs started appearing down there was he set up? They
They were just getting here. They didn't even have, they they had 7 guns unlimbered, and the Parrott rifle didn't get unlimbered before the fighting started, and they never really got around to unlimbering that Parrott rifle. Anything else? Okay.
Excuse me, if we're up on this hill, do we have the tree that will live through the battle around here? Witness tree? Witness tree?
I'm not sure about this, but I believe Joni told me a long time ago, she was the manager of the battlefield, way over on the other side of the battlefield in the area they called Sleetown near the Chatham House, if anybody knows the map, that apparently there's a tree over there that's still alive that was a witness tree. I don't know that for sure, but from what I heard, there's really not. And one of the reasons for that, and there may be many witness trees, but the thing is, we can't call it a witness tree unless we have photographic evidence. And there weren't any photographs of Perryville at the time of the battle. You realize the first battlefield photographs appeared by Matthew Brady right after the Battle of Antietam. And the Battle of Antietam was what, 17th, what is that, 2-3 weeks before the Battle of Perryville. So there was no photographs here until like the 1880s. So unless you have really good photographic and documentation, we don't say it's a witness tree. And of course, the most famous witness tree is right there at Antietam at the...
Why couldn't they take one of those where they drill into a tree and they tell the age by the rings?
I do not know why they... You know, it's hard on the trees, that's true, and especially if it's a tree that you want to preserve, you wouldn't want to damage it. Yes, ma'am.
I went and double checked. My husband's grandfather, Philip Reynolds,
Yes.
enlisted in August of that year, 105th Ohio.
There you go.
He survived.
Good for him, and good for you.
He was discharged in 1864. He was wounded,
Mm.
and he had achieved the rank of corporal by that point.
Well, if he was in the 105th Ohio, I would recommend you get online and you look up the book Story of 1,000 by Albion Torgy. He wrote the definitive biography of the regiment, and it talks about from him mustering outside of Cleveland all the way to the 1864 when they closed out the Albion Torgy Story of 1,000. You can get it off Amazon or whatever.
He was part of Updike's Tigers. That's what they called him. Famous regiment. Very famous.
We saw them at Chickamauga.
Saw them at Chickamauga and in Queen.
I've seen him in my basement.
68. He
He's
was
there in your basement. Okay.
So,
He's got it in the basement.
all right, keep moving here.
What can you tell us from here about the cornfield? Is that laid out down here?
Well, you see my notes? Look what I got here at the top of the page. Cornfield.
Cornfield.
So I'm getting ready to talk about the cornfield.
All right. Then.
All right. There on the hill west of the road.
It was owned by Colonel Kellogg, and he started a cereal company.
Remember, I'm talking from the Confederate left. You had the 1st Tennessee. They were ordered to come all the way around to the far right and to take the hill going up that way. Well, they got up fighting. They said one of the quotes, I think it was Sam Watkins. I imagine some of you have heard of Sam Watkins. He was of Company H, yes ma'am. They one of the more famous of the Civil War authors. He said, I believe it was him who said that going up that hill, it was the hill was slippery with blood. And several people talk about, you've heard about, they say that you could walk all the way up that hill walking on bodies without hitting the ground if you wanted to. Something else I want to try to talk, 2 things that are interesting about this battle, and I'm sure it happened in other battles, but especially this is rather early in the war. 2 kind of odd things that occurred was, one, the soldiers, this is their first combat, and even seasoned soldiers, this is a pretty scary thing, really freaking, stressing you out. A lot of them, they would forget to take the ramrod out of their rifle when they fired. So sometimes they would fire here, and then they'd just go up, boom, and after the battle, you'd see people who are dead with a ramrod through their chest, or you'd see ramrods stuck in trees and such. The other thing that they did was sometimes they drop the ball down, they'd pack it down, and then they'd put the ramrod back, and then they get ready to fire, and then it's like, did I put a ball in there? I don't remember. So they'd go ahead and they'd load and they'd put another ball in there, and they'd do that. And there is a story up on the other side of the battle where a soldier did that, where he put like 2 or 3 balls in, and it wouldn't fire because it was jammed. He threw that down and went out looking for another one. The next one had like, one of them even had balls all the way up to the end of the barrel that they picked up. And apparently it was the 7th rifle he picked up before he could get one that he could fire. And that, I mean, I don't know if anybody here has been in the military and has seen combat, or as they said back then, has seen the elephant. But I don't think we have, I was in the Army, but I didn't see combat. We have no idea what it's like. We have no idea what it's like to be under that kind of stress, under that kind of fire, under that kind of, I was a drill sergeant, believe it or not, and I used to tell my troops that, look, nothing I can do can give you the stress of combat. Army is a stress test. Everything we do is designed to be difficult because we want you to keep an edge on you. Because no matter how much stress and how much hard I can drive you, I cannot give you as much stress as combat. If you can't stand me getting into your face and calling your mother names, then how are you going to be able to stay in that foxhole when your buddy gets blown apart and people are charging you? There's no stress that we can even imagine like that. And that's a lot about what the Army's about. So if you've been in the Army and you thought, man, nothing was easy, well, it's designed that way. But I digress. All right, so they're coming up this hill. Some of the worst, they get up to the top of the hill. There's some really bloody hand-to-hand fighting up there with bayonets. They're back and forth, and the Union Army, the Union soldiers, they get pushed off that hill. The 1st Tennessee, essentially, mostly the 1st Tennessee, take that hill. Patterson, John Patterson, I believe was his name. He was the colonel of the, Lieutenant Colonel John Patterson. He was the commander of the 1st Tennessee. When he got up there, he got shot off his horse, and his horse came running back down the hill. And some people think that that was the reason why, for some inexplicable reason, the 1st Tennessee took that hill. Once they got up there, they retreated back down the hill and just basically gave it up. There's several reasons why they might have think that happens, but nobody's really sure. So basically they get down to the hill, bottom of the hill. The 1st Wisconsin and the 79th Pennsylvania, they retake that hill, and then we have to do it all over again. So they have to fight back up that hill one more time. This time you've got elements of Stewart's 4th and 5th Regiment come up here. Them Georgians that I was telling you about, the 41st Georgians, they're shot out by now. The 6th and the 9th Tennessee, maybe half of them are still in the fight. They're just totally exhausted. They get up to the top of the hill, really severe combat. They finally take the hill. They get down that hill, they go up, and there's an even bigger hill after that. The Confederates get up there, or as you were, the Union Army, they get back up to the next hill past that, and there's a stone fence up there, about this high. And right now it's about this high. I was up there last spring, and we were trying to rebuild the fence and clear out some areas. But that is considered the high water mark of the Confederacy. I don't think of it as a high water mark of the Confederacy because, well, what they say is like at Gettysburg, that's the furthest north that the Confederates made it. So that was the high water mark in the east. Well, they say here, this was the high water mark in the west. I kind of think Covington, Kentucky was a high water mark of the west because elements of Edmund Kirby Smith's army made a feint towards Cincinnati, and they almost decided to attack Cincinnati, but they didn't. They just kind of got as far as Covington or Fort Wright, Florence area. If you know Cincinnati, it's just south of the town. They made it that far. So technically, I think that's the furthest north, if you don't count John Hunt Morgan's raid into Ohio. And anyway, this is, as far as this campaign goes, this is kind of the farthest they pushed the Union Army. And by this time, it was getting dark. They were running out of ammunition. They were running out of fuel. They didn't have, I mean, they were hungry, they were starving. It was getting dark, and there wasn't a whole lot more they could have done. They played the little back and forth game. They almost got up to the hill, almost took that one. And it was significant because where we'll go see next is right over there, a place called the Dixville Crossroads that I'll show you. That it said that if they would have pushed the rebels back that far, then they would have isolated First Corps from the rest of the Union Army and could have taken out the whole Union Corps. I disagree again, for reasons I'll get into. I guess I don't think anything that the Confederates did here, there's no way they were going to win. Let's face it, okay? Because, and this is one of the significant things about this battle, is people talk about this as a climactic battle that decided the fate of Kentucky. I don't think so. Nothing that happened on October 8th would have changed the outcome of this of the state of Kentucky. Kentucky was not going to go Confederate. Maybe if they took Louisville, maybe this, maybe that, blah, 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 but it wasn't going to happen. Kentucky's was just too Union at the time. It was kind of odd that the further they went through the war, the more pro-Confederate they got, just because they were sick of the way the Yankees were occupying them and taking liberties and taking their stuff, and they just kind of got more pro-rebel as the war went on. But this was really their last and only chance to take Kentucky. Kentucky just didn't want to be taken. Bragg was lucky. Bragg was lucky to get out of here with his army intact, because he had 16,000, bless you, he had 16,800 soldiers here fighting. Buell had 55,000 soldiers in 3 corps. There was just some 20,000 and 15,000 in the First Corps and about 20 and 20,000 in Second and Third Corps. They didn't even know Second Corps, I don't know if I mentioned this, I think I did. Second Corps under the command of John Crittenden, in name only. The real commander was George Thomas, but he was just about 3 miles up the road here on the other side of Perryville. He was playing around with Joseph Wheeler's cavalry and coming very slowly this way. And I already told you about Philip Sheridan and the Third Corps that was right up over that hill over there that we'll show you here in a little bit. So there's 20,000, another 20,000 that didn't even know the battle was taking place. One of the things about this battle was what they called acoustic shadow. General Don Carlos Buell was 3 miles away over here at the Dorsey House, which you should easily be able to hear a full-scale battle going on. But it just distant rumblings is what they heard. They thought basically it was just cavalry and artillery skirmishing. And he even gave a few orders, say, tell them to stop wasting ammunition. We don't want any fighting until tomorrow when all 3 corps are together. So he was laid up in bed. He had a wounded leg because he was a jerk the day before. All right, I guess I have to, yeah. Marching in, there was some skirmish, some people were scavenging. I think it was an apple orchard or something. And a soldier was sitting down on the ground eating an apple he'd taken from a tree. I think it was an apple, might have been a peach, but it don't matter. But anyway, Buell came up riding on his horse, and he started yelling at the soldiers using some words he didn't learn in church. And that soldier, he got up, grabbed the reins of the horse. The horse bucked up, threw Buell off, and Buell busted his leg up. Sprained it pretty bad. And so Buell spent the next day laying in bed, reading and dining with General Gilbert, while his army and his career was being blown away just a few miles away. But so that's pretty much, I mean, yeah, okay, that's a pretty good talk for this half of the, I mean, I always feel like I'm skipping over so much, but I try not to get.
Where did the first capture that first Tennessee flag?
Oh, that would be at the top of the hill up there. Okay. Because the first Tennessee, I told you, they took the hill once, and then for whatever reason, they retreated back down the hill, and then they came back, they captured the flag, and then they came back. Actually, they thought, what was it? Oh yeah, they originally thought, because it was, I don't have a picture of the flag, they thought it was like a black flag saying we take no quarter. And that meaning that we don't take any prisoners, we just kill everybody we capture. And so that kind of startled them a little bit. But it was basically Polk's flag, which is kind of like the Confederate flag is like an X. Polk's flag is like, I think it's the St. Andrew's cross, I believe. And what was it, St. George? There's St. George's cross is the classic Confederate flag that we think of, the rebel flag. And then St. Andrew's cross is the plus kind of cross. So we saw that. And then the other main flag we saw here was Hardee's flag, which was a white moon circle on a blue field. And that was on the other side, and Claiborne did that one. Any other people? Yes, ma'am.
What exactly caused the acoustic shadow?
Repeat the questions, okay?
What exactly caused the acoustic shadow?
Probably the hill.
Well, scientifically, they say that the curvature of the hills caused the sound waves to refract up, and the other thing is the wind direction. The wind direction was coming, the wind was coming from that direction going this way, so it was blowing a lot of the noise that way. Both Harrodsburg and Danville could hear the battle, but he said he couldn't hear it, other than it just sounded like a little bit of rumbling in the distance. I don't know how much of that is him really saying he couldn't hear it, and how much of it was really an excuse for not being more involved during the battle. Do you have something?
No.
Okay.
May I ask, what happened to the Union cannons that were all around and up on that hill?
Well, what happened to the Union cannons on this hill and that hill? On this hill, they got turned around, and Turner's artillerymen captured these cannons, and they were using these cannons up against Starkweather's men up on that hill. And then when they got up that hill, and here's something I want you to realize. When we get up that hill and we turn around that corner, I want you to notice that what it was like to get to the next hill. They pretty much saved Stone's battery, 4 cannons. Now, all their horses were dead. Now think about that, 12 cannons, so you had 144 horses on the other side that had to be dealt with. But they actually, without horses, took 4 of those cannons down that hill and then up the next hill, just carrying it by hand. And I can imagine you probably had to have 50, 60 people trying to manage. But when we get on the bus and we drive around there, I want you to notice that and just think about what it would be like trying to take those cannons up that hill.
No, those are Wisconsin men.
Those are Wisconsin men.
Per cannon.
Wisconsin men only needed 2 per cannon.
So when we walk back down the hill, do me a favor, okay? Put yourself not in 2019, put yourself in 1862. As you go slowly down the hill so we don't tumble. Picture the heat, the fog of war, the screaming of the horses and the human wounded, and let your senses take over for a little bit, because that's what you're going to remember from Perryville, this incredible vista and how the ground had to affect the battle.
So here's something we might want to do too. Since we came up this way, why don't we follow William Terrell? We can go down this hill and over, and then that way you can see the Devil's Lane fence I told you about, and you can kind of follow the way Terrell came down and the way he retreated.
Do not take any buttons.
No buttons.